How you doing, folks? You're watching Live with ONRIE, and I'm your host, ONRIE Compen. Now, today's guest, he absolutely does not need any introduction at all because you've probably seen his work if you've ever been in a comic book shop. Why? Because his artwork is so phenomenal that comic book publishers, big and small, hire him to work on everything. He's done everything. He's been everywhere, and he's so big that he is one of the creators of the show The Boys, which is about to go into its second season. One of my favorite shows of last year was The Boys, and it is a huge honor to have Darick Robertson, the artist of the series, in the house. Darick, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, ONRIE. Thanks for having me on your show.
No problem, man. Well, for those few measly people who don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I don't appreciate you talking about my wife that way. My name, as you said, I'm Darick Robertson. I've been drawing comics professionally for over 30 years. I'm the co-creator of The Boys, Transmetropolitan, Happy, and Oliver, which is my new series with Gary Whitta, who wrote the Book of Eli and Rogue One, Star Wars story. And I'm currently working on Hellblazer Rise and Fall with the awesome Tom Taylor for DC's Black Label, which will be coming out next month.
That is phenomenal. So you have been keeping busy, which is fantastic.
Yeah, very. There's nothing as we were talking before we went live, like there's nothing else going on right now except, so, it's a good time to have work. I'm very grateful for that.
Darick, I want to dial back for a minute. Let's go.
Sure.
Let's go to the beginning of your career as an artist.
You got
it. What was the point when you picked up a comic for the first time, or did you pick up a comic for the? What was that aha moment for you that where you said, I want to get into comics?
Okay, I would say it. I've always loved comics, but for a long time, I loved them in the abstract because I would get them for free. They would relatives or like my dad's barber. The comic books were disposable magazines to them. They were like newspapers or, old issues of Life magazine. They weren't really collectibles when I was a young boy in the early 70s. Like most people treated them as disposable. So people would give me, but they saw that I liked to draw and I was into like Snoopy and Peanuts and Looney Tunes and things like that. So I was drawing that stuff a lot as a little boy, and I had a penchant for it. I learned how to do Tweety Bird pretty good, and I'd had relatives like, "Oh, draw me a Tweety Bird, draw me a Snoopy," So, but then I kind of fell in love with. So people would give me comic books, and I would just devour them like. The old Gold Key comics, like the Bugs Bunny comics or Star Trek or things like that. And always there'd be some Marvel and DCs thrown in. And then as I got a little older, I started, especially around 78, I really fell in love with like the superheroes like DC, Batman and Superman because of the movie. And, that kind of took me in another direction, but it wasn't until 79 that I remember being at a pharmacy and I found a copy of Flash. I think it's 279 or 272. And it just had this incredible Jose Garcia Lopez cover of him.
He's incredible.
Oh, who's just one of the best artists.
One of the best artists and one of the kindest guys in the world too.
See, I know, so humble. It's ridiculous that he isn't like, paraded on a gold throne around San Diego Comic-Con every year, but at the same time,
I did get to escort him, by the way, at Planet Comic. Cool. He was sitting in the passenger seat of my Sentra.
Oh, so nice.
It's been blessed by him.
I remember going up to him at a convention years ago and just like gushing about how much I loved him and Atari Force and all his work and Cinder and Ash, and he was like, okay, thank you. Like he was sort of bewildered by all the my enthusiasm for meeting him. He was just like, but he was very kind, but I just didn't think that he just doesn't carry much of an ego. So, but anyway, so he had this incredible Flash cover that I love so much. And mostly because of the angle and of course the anatomy's perfect. And in the wrong hands, it probably would have been a goofy looking cover. He made it look dynamic and awesome because it's at a time in comics when the stories were let's just say, aimed for a younger audience and a lot more, I don't know, they almost read like stream of consciousness when I go back and read these old comics that I loved so much at the time. But the story was about this clown who was able to paralyze people with this weird calliope that would, the music would make people paralyzed or control people's minds. And Flash is paralyzed. He can't do anything. He's and there's these guys up on wires on a makeshift unicycle for 3, and they're in danger of falling, and Flash is trying to save them, and he can't because this calliope is freezing him. But what was really fascinating to me is how much I could see that whole story in just the one image. And I loved things like that at the time, especially fantasy painters like Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo. And they were able to capture a whole story in one image, Frazetta especially.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, and that to me, and then it's all done with composition and dynamics and things that I just didn't understand at all at the time. I just knew I liked it. But then I opened up the issue, and I believe it was drawn by Rich Buckler, and it was so cool because the Flash, when he would run, you'd see him in each one of his poses, a different, like almost like a Muybridge reference. Famous photographer who captured back in the 1800s, who captured people in motion and things in motion. And Muybridge, would show like each stage of the running. And so they would put that along Flash as you would follow your eye to wherever he was in the foreground. And it created an animation just by looking at it. And that, to me, that was probably my awakening. I went, how is that? How do they do that? It was like I watched somebody doing a magic trick. And at the same time, I also figured out it was a trick. Like, I know that nobody really pulled a coin out of my ear. That was, that was the magic. I wanted to know how to do that. And so that got me falling in love with, that kind of superhero main or sequential comics. And from there, I remember I started creating my own characters and trying to draw my own comic book by stapling typing paper together and doing a cover and doing all the little details, designing a logo and coming up with my publisher name and all this. So it would look like a real comic, like, to me. And I did like an 8-page comic. This was when I was like 10.
What was your publishing name?
Victory.
Oh, I like that. I love it.
Victory.
That's awesome.
Victory Comics.
Right on, brother. Then, that's awesome.
And the character's name was Nightwind. And it was like, it's so funny because I go back and I read it, and now, and
you still have it.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
I scanned it and everything because I like to share this with, especially when I meet kids or kids of my family that want to draw, and they're like, how did you get it? I want to show them, like, look, I just taught myself to draw. I just did it until I got good at it, and I'm still trying to get good at it, So I was impressed with but I also realized it was kind of this thing that I didn't know I was doing, but I was, which is like, it's manifestation. Like, if you really want something, you visualize it in your mind and you focus on it until it happens. And so for me, I can draw a direct line to my first published comic all the way back to Nightwind, because I just wanted it that badly. And so, because to me, I remember having this moment in 7th grade when I was just doing comics for the fun of it, that I realized people were getting paid to do comics. And I never really thought about that before. I just loved the making of them. And when I realized people were getting paid and there were these names inside, I'm like, oh, the artist is John Byrne. Oh, the artist is Frank Miller. I was like, these guys have a job. And then I thought, wow, you mean somebody might pay me? I'm a kid, but somebody might pay me to sit and draw comics all day long. That would be awesome. And so that's when I think I wanted to be a lawyer originally because somebody said I was good at arguing. But I guess, and if you look at my Twitter feed, I guess that's true. But at the same time, like, I really love, and that stuff still fascinates me. But with comics, it was more like, but my friend at the time in 7th grade was like, oh yeah, I could see you being a lawyer. You'd be defending somebody for murder, but you'd be drawing Superman on your, tablet in the courtroom, and I'm like, and it was weird because it was so accurate that I even at 7, even as a kid, I was like, God, he's right. That's exactly what I'd be doing, because I can't concentrate as it is without doodling. So, if I'm bored in any kind of situation, I'll get out a pen and start sketching. That's the way I've always entertained myself, and that's kind of like a good thing to turn into a career because I draw compulsively. If I didn't draw, I get weirdly depressed. So.
One thing I want to say about that, speaking to you about being a lawyer, you have a very strong sense of justice, which is something that I really respect about you. And you've always had this attitude about helping the little guy. And I know because you've helped me firsthand.
Oh, yeah.
When I first came out with Yisum Shin, I had a very difficult time getting it out there, because it's always hard when you're self-publishing and you're trying to push something. And I remember you were one of the few creators that I approached, and you totally hooked me up with a blurb. Every time I saw you at a convention, you were one of the most easy guys to approach.
Huh.
And I that really resonated with me a lot. And I think it's really great, just from a standpoint of, maybe you're not a lawyer, maybe you're not out there arguing and doing stuff, but I see you as somebody who stands for the things that he believes are right. And I respect that tremendously. So I just wanted to say that before.
No, I appreciate that. I'm glad that's how you perceive me. I would
Absolutely
say that, it was very easy to support your book because you put out a good book. And if you didn't have good quality material, I would have given you advice, but I wouldn't have given you, I don't just do it for everybody.
Yeah, you don't just give props to someone just for the sake of it.
The stuff is good, but you put out a really good book. I'm always impressed with how good your indie book was. And also, from my own history, I'm very sympathetic to how hard it is to get an indie book going and live off of it. Even with now, I'm doing Oliver for Image Comics, but it's like I have to do it as a labor of love because it's an indie book. It's not, flying off the shelves, and I can't do it monthly at this point. So, I get it, because that still doesn't, that aspect of things doesn't go away just because you achieve a certain level of success in this business. Every new job is its own thing.
Well, I want to speak to that because you have a very profound level of experience on the business side of this. But before that, I just want to point out one other thing. How does the guy who starts out drawing Snoopy and Tweety Bird go on to drawing some of the most gruesome shit I've ever seen in comics, like the Punisher, like Transmetropolitan?
Yeah,
I just love that.
It has a lot to do with my very first published comic, Space Beaver. And
there you go, Space Beaver.
No, it's not dirty. It wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't dirty. Okay, all right.
Not at all. It's just it's actually about an animal. It was a funny animal comic that I did but I created as a joke, sort of in response to some stuff that I was reading and enjoying at the time. And it was around the time Ninja Turtles had just hit big. And so I didn't know this, but there was this black and white comics boom starting to happen, and everybody was looking for the next Ninja Turtles. So I had this character, Space Beaver, and I literally was in high school and summer school, and I had started writing and drawing this to entertain myself. As I said, I was a compulsive doodler. So I started writing and drawing the Space Beaver story, and long story short, it got an indie store owner named Tibor Sardi wanted to publish it and put it out there for me, and I made a little money on it. Not what I should have, but as I didn't understand the business. But for a 17-year-old kid, I was pretty excited just to have my own book. So but I have a very dark sense of humor, and I always have. I liked horror movies growing up. Begged my dad to see Jaws in the theater when I was, a kid. And then Heavy Metal magazine, and then the movie came into my life, and like I said, and I love Frank Frazetta and that kind of stuff. So it's like I've always kind of had this. My first impulse was to be a fantasy painter. I didn't really know that. I wanted to do that too. So I didn't really think about being a professional comic book artist as much as I thought about being a fantasy painter like Frazetta. So I have these paintings I did back then. But I realized pretty quickly that I didn't know how to draw. So I really started focusing on getting good at anatomy and, learning composition, things like that. So my paintings would eventually be better. And then I never went back to painting. I fell in love with sequential art and started studying, Eisner and taking the Marvel, how to draw comics the Marvel way seriously and really learning it. So those things were on my path. But as far as like going from Snoopy and Tweety Bird, which I still love, I like those. I still like those cartoons. Those Looney Tunes are excellent. But for me, it was about like Space Beaver was kind of like the middle ground with all of that. So Space Beaver was violent and irreverent in a lot of ways because I was just drawing whatever I wanted to draw. And, I did nightmare sequences and also it was based on the premise that it made me laugh that there was these cute cartoon animals, but if they started warring that they were full of blood and guts and, so a little, seeing like, skulls fly open and bones that pop out, things like that made me laugh.
There's another issue of Wolverine that you did. I remember, I want to say in like 2005 and 6, there was an issue of The Punisher where he kicked the crap out of Wolverine.
Yeah.
And then I think it was you and Greg Rucka. You guys did an issue where you reversed the tables where Wolverine had his chance to get back at the Punisher.
Yeah, I don't think I drew those issues. I remember.
Really, I could have sworn it was you.
I think actually, if I.
Oh no! You did the Punisher one. Sorry, you did the Punisher where
Wolverine gets it.
Yeah, yes.
And I think it was actually Frank, who did the
reverse one. Yeah, but I remember the Punisher one. That felt like a Looney Tunes cartoon.
Yeah,
I loved it. I loved it though. I mean, there was so much goddamn action and violence and everything. I mean, like when Punisher put him underneath the tractor and just rolled over him. Yeah. I mean, that shit was just like, holy crap.
No, that was clearly.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Garth Ennis having a heyday because he
it was you and Garth Ennis. Oh, really? He couldn't stand Wolverine. I didn't know
he
that.
Thought he was ridiculous. So, which would lead to the boys. Like he didn't grow up with that stuff. So he likes, like his stuff is like 2000 AD, like Judge Dredd, and that's and war comics and things like that. That's really where his childhood traces back to. So like the Marvel and DC universe always seemed kind of ridiculous to him, but he brings this incredible edge to it because of his, kind of his contempt for it makes it very entertaining because he'll, rather than just make fun of it from afar, he would create stories. And so and for me, it's just like, I just love drawing, superhero characters. So that's why the boys ended up being such a good fit for us. I was happy to just be drawing and designing superheroes, and and I have a dark sense of humor. So what he would write would make me laugh.
That's that
I get the humor in it, and I try to bring
it all makes sense to me how your love of this of one thing like Looney, because I've always felt like it's almost, you can't help but laugh, like especially when you look at season 1 of The Boys. Who was the Aquaman character? The Deep. Yes, the Deep. Everything that happened with the Deep in season 1 is like straight out of something you and Ennis would do in The Boys. It was so fucking hysterical.
Yeah.
And, you need that humor, but, honestly, when we break it down to the comic book form, which is what allowed all of this show to transpire, having that stuff in there is what I think always makes Ennis's work pop, and having you as an artist and bringing that sense of fluidity in terms of, being so extreme with the art when it comes to the violence. It's just like, it fits. It's such a perfect fit.
Yeah,
I really love it.
When I co-create something, it's like, I try to really bring, the writer's vision forward, but I also try to bring my own self into it too. So I'm not just, following direction. I'm trying to, I literally co-create. So, and that's where I think the sweet spot with the show is that it picks up on exactly what we need to make the comic work is in there, but they did their own thing. So it works very well as a television show, because comics and TV are not the same medium, but they did a really amazing thing. Eric Kripke and crew did with, they kind of took Jack from Jupiter and the Deep and made him a more interesting character, and then made Homelander more aloof from the team. So the fact that it's the Deep but then I can walk through side by side and show panels where it looks like they set up their camera to mirror my panels. Like when he's exposing himself to Starlight in the pilot, there's a shot that
I remember that right in issue 1. I still have my copy of. Oh, is it issue 3?
Yeah,
I have the first full run of that.
We see Huey and Butcher meet, and
that's right.
And Huey loses his girlfriend, and then we meet Annie and the 7 in issue 3.
I'm sorry I'm so off today, but one thing the first thing I remember from reading The Boys was the hands. And I was shocked to see how well that was adapted, because that was such an extreme scene.
Yes.
And that was so brutal.
Well, that was really great, because a great experience, because back in I think it was 2018, when the show just hadn't been announced yet, but we found out that it was going to be a thing. And I met Eric Kripke at Comic-Con, and he and I sat down for a while, and he kindly, Eric Kripke is the reason the show is amazing, by the way, as the showrunner, and he's just amazing. So first thing he did is he had asked, separately, he asked what Ennis and I wanted to see in the show. And I was just like, I can't even believe you're asking me. That's so great. He goes, no, I really want to, what's important to you? How do you envision this? Like what? And I said, well, it needs to be funny. I said, if it's just dark, it's just going to be a long, ugly slog. And I think if people will tune out, but I think if you keep the humor, that's a big part of what makes this work. And he agreed with me. And then, and I said, and I hope that more than anything that you include the shot of Huey holding the arms. And he was like, really? And I said, yeah. I go, that's the moment that the audience is going to connect with Huey. And if that moment's not in there, the fans are going to feel it. But more so, I think the larger audience, it's like it's shocking for a reason, and it's brutal for a reason. And it really makes you identify with Huey. You feel things through Huey's point of view. And if you don't, then I think you get lost in that show, because there's so many moving pieces. But he agreed, and he made sure it was in there, and they handled it brilliantly. Didn't happen at a carnival, but it didn't matter. And I've gotten to be friends with Jack Quaid, and Jack's performance in that is just fantastic. Like
he's a rising star,
screaming her name. Like I choked up. I'm like, they did it. It was great.
Yeah. No,
that's a great show. The cast is fantastic. They're all really nice people, and it's just amazing to see, having been on set twice. It's incredible to watch how well everybody works together, from the crew to the cast to the costuming. Everybody is just nice and getting along and working on their A game. I mean, everybody's, and people would come up and tell me like, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm working on this show." And
does anybody come up to you and thank you for the fact that
profusely? Like I had my friend, the guy who's a stand-in for Mother's Milk. His name's Boris, and he's a great guy. And
Boris, oh okay,
his name, yeah, he's a cool guy. But Boris came up and he was like, I'm going to be able to start a family because of my job on this show, and that wouldn't happen if you hadn't created this world. And I'm like, well, I think you'd probably be all right. But it was a really nice thing. There's no, I'm giving you a hug. And he gave me a big hug. He goes, and I'm like, well, thanks. It's like, I feel lucky just to be there, because they're, I've not had that experience with other shows of mine that have been, or things of mine that have been adapted. They've really included me in a welcoming way, and I've done artwork for the show. There's some of my artwork's going to be a sequence in season 2, and it's really fun. It's been
that's phenomenal.
Everybody.
So from a business standpoint, you've seen this industry from multiple facets, and you're one of the few creators that I've had on the show who has actually seen their work visualized into a different medium, and not only that, is seen it blow up to the point where it is the #1 show on Amazon. Yeah. There is not one part of the planet you can go to right now where people have not at least heard of The Boys in passing. It's an amazing feeling. But what is I mean, where do you fall into all of this in terms of seeing how all of this stuff is realized? What role do you play in all this? Are you just kind of like, all right, I'm the artist, like I did my job, now whatever happens is what happens? Or did you actually have some involvement in getting a deal made, because you are one of the creators of the series?
No, it really went on a long ride before it actually got to where it is now. They optioned the film rights, or Sony optioned the film rights back in 2008, right after we had just made the move over to Dynamite, and for 10 years we thought this is going to be the year. It kept going on this weird path. At one point, Adam McKay was going to direct it, and he and Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi had a great script. It was going to be a trilogy, and we were just sure this was going to be our big thing. And but in 2008, like that's when the first Iron Man movie came out. So like the studio just wasn't really clear on what they had. And then after the tsunami in, I think it was 2011.
Yes. In Japan.
Yeah. Sony scaled back on everything because they had a horrible quarter, and they let it go. And so Paramount got it for a couple of years and then never pulled the trigger on it, but they paid us for the option, which was, we kept thinking, well, they're paying us this money, they're going to do something with it. And then they didn't, and then they wouldn't. And then, and eventually it just went into turnaround, which is, so it was just sitting there, and then the rights expired again. But in that time, Eric Kripke had gotten wind that it was available, and Kripke is a huge fan of the comics. And so because he knew a guy on the producer side that had the option, he like, I want to do this. And he single-handedly set it up so he could come in and be the guy to create the TV show that we enjoy now. So was I a part of that? No, not really. But I was a part of it in that he really loved the comics that much. So I guess I did something right. But I was, but I'm a co-executive producer on the show, which means I get a nice title card, and I've been to set, and like I said, I've done work for the show because I want to be a part of contributing however I can. I enjoy it so much, and like I said, I've gotten to know the people that are involved, but I don't sit in the writer's room or anything.
Well, I still think what's really amazing about it is the fact that you have. You've seen this process. There's no such thing as the overnight success. But what I really find inspiring about what you just told me is it was a fan who turned your series into a TV show that has become the most popular thing. I think that it's rather than the thing is that he had to go to great lengths in order to acquire the license and in order to make it. And because that was the case, he put everything he had into it. Just from what you're saying, it sounds like he really cared about impressing you guys. It's sort of like he's like your Kevin Feige, like he didn't go about getting the rights. He got the job basically. Like, okay. Sorry.
Rights were already owned, but they needed somebody attached to this to get it made. That's kind of how this works.
Which is even more difficult. I mean, How do you say I'm the guy for the job?
Yeah. So when Adam McKay decided he'd rather go on and make Oscar-winning movies than wait around for our thing to get freed up, he and Adam's a great guy, so I say that with a smile on my face.
Well, we can see you're smiling right
super
now.
Super happy for his success. But it was really that Eric wanted to do the show, so this is like a labor of love for him, and he feels like, and he's often said this is the best thing I've ever worked on, and he's super proud of it, and that his enthusiasm and ability to put together a great crew and all of his experience from all the other great stuff he's created, like Supernatural, it really shows he knows what he's doing. And especially when you're on, like I said, having been on set and been around the people that are on set and knowing them a little bit, I can see how he just gathers this amazing group of talent, and he is very good about picking who's going to get along, and it shows. And other people, like in conversations with the actors, they would say, oh no, I've been on shows where it's like been a nightmare, and people.
It sounds like it's a leadership thing.
It is a leadership thing. I chalk it up to that. I think it's about, he picks people that he gets along with, and it really comes through in the chemistry on the show.
Well, I have a question for you from one of our viewers,
Sure.
Alton Simpson, an incredible writer, by the way. If you've ever read Vampires in Brooklyn, Vampires in New Jersey, my bad, Vampires of New Jersey, beautiful series. I'm telling you, check it out. Yeah, great series. He wanted me to ask you about Stormfront because
Sure.
It's different from the TV. It's different on TV than it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess that's the question then. So he just wanted me to ask you about Stormfront.
Well, she's female.
and there we go. There's your answer.
I got a no spoilers clause when it comes to season 2. So let's just say Aya Cash is awesome, and I'm really excited that she's on the show because I was a big fan of You're the Worst. Mm-hmm. And they do. This is another great example of how they take what is in The Boys, but they do their own remix on it, because that's sort of like what makes the show separate from the comic. Is they're not doing the comic verbatim, but they show the comic a great amount of love nonetheless. So they keep going to the comics, finding good stuff in there, and then making it work in the show, in the universe that they're building. Because the comic book came out it ended in like 2012 and it started in 2007. So, it's a lot of the world has changed in that time, in that decade. So they're a lot more on the ball and sensitive for telling a story that works in today's environment better than our comic book would have if they just did it straight as the comic book was. So, but there's some twists and turns with Stormfront, but I don't want to say too much.
Going back to, the process of getting it to where it is, it seems like timing was a major issue, and the timing for when the show came out could not have been better. Yeah. We're looking at a post Avengers Endgame world, and, you got this story that offers a completely unique take on superheroes. What if the superheroes were actually the bad guys? And, seeing it, what that taught me as a creator, because obviously I aspire to end up where you are, Darick, in the sense that I would love to see my work adapted to the big screen at some point, or the small screen, wherever it's going to take me. And I've come to the point where I've realized that it seems to be a timing issue. Everything kind of has to align in order for it to find the greatest amount of success. And I think, when you focus on the work primarily, you tend to allow that to happen naturally because it finds the right audience, and you never know who's reading your stuff. What do you say to that? I mean, and let's not forget that The Boys is not the only show you've seen adapted to the big screen. You've seen Happy as well, which I have not actually had the pleasure of checking out yet, but has always kind of piqued my interest. And I see it's on Netflix now, so I should probably check it out. But how was that different than The Boys for you?
Happy?
Yeah.
I was much less involved.
Oh, okay. Are you happy with the way that turned out?
I think the cast did a great job. I like the animation they brought to it, but I wasn't that involved in the show.
Huh, okay. And that was another thing where you bring your animated feel into the picture too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's like where my Looney Tunes for the comic book. That's where my Looney Tunes background really showed through.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing I want to talk to you about is this transition now into, you have a new series, and you were mentioning earlier Oliver. So Oliver is something you're doing as a labor of love, and for those of you who don't know what that means, it means that you are putting out a book on a monthly basis. It's not monthly.
I wanted it to be, but I have to, because it's an independent book. It's like I have to have other work at the same time, and it's labor of love in that I get to work on it when I can schedule time for it.
Okay, and I remember seeing a post from Rick Remender a couple weeks ago where he was talking about why he preferred to work at Image, because even though he was operating at a loss with his titles, because as each issue comes out, you see a decline in the sales. But he's much more satisfied with the work. And you're working with a pretty high profile writer on Oliver. And, you know, even with that, even with you being a superstar artist and having an accomplished writer, you're still facing challenges.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm like Rick in that, you know, the books have been, you know, issue 1 did well, but then like the other ones are in the red. And I don't quite understand that. But part of it is that I think we're in the middle of a flux in the business where I think the future is going to be graphic novels. And I've been saying this for a little while, because we've lost our patience for entertainment, because I think as a society, we're used to getting things that we can binge on. And there's so much to choose from now that waiting a whole month for a comic for the next part of the story, it's like, it's not satisfying enough. I think people want to sit down and read a whole book, but the business model is set up for people to put out monthly comics as individual floppies. So, you know, it sort of becomes a case where both realities might be the case, but you got to roll the dice on it. Like, you could put together a whole graphic novel that people could sit down and read in one sitting, and it might not sell. And then you've invested all this time and money into something that doesn't sell. Or you could put out these floppies and get a sense of whether or not the book's going to be a hit. And it could do well for a bit and then die off and then do great as a collection, because some people will buy a couple issues and go, okay, I'm going to get the trade paperback, the collection. So you don't know really if your thing's successful or not. And we've gotten amazing reviews. So our reviews are through the roof. One of the best reviewed books I've ever worked on. It's an adaptation of a story that Gary wrote back in at the beginning of his career. We're adapting his screenplay into a comic, and I'm making it very cinematic. It's some of the best art I've ever created.
I remember seeing preview pages of it. I saw you at what was that comic shop in Philadelphia? They flew you down for a weekend.
Oh yeah.
I forgot. You just said you had Fat Jack's, was it?
Yeah, I think it was Fat Jack's.
Yeah. And I remember you had your portfolio with you, and you know, I saw some of the artwork in there, and it was riveting stuff, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
but
I mean, like, I really love the work, and it's like, if there was no other financial considerations to my time, I would just be working away on it. But, you know, I got a family.
Of course.
I got I'm going to finish the book. I'm going to continue on with it. It's just, I have to be able to work on it when I have time for it. But I hopefully, you know, eventually it'll be a collection, because what I learned with Transmetropolitan is that we struggled with that book when it was being published, and it almost got canceled a number of times. And what's crazy is that once they collected it, the collections sell like mad to this day. Like, we still do very well with the Transmetropolitan collections. People are still just now discovering the book. But if you had went off of the sales and how things looked in 1997, when we were in the thick of it, you know, we were part of a launch of a company called Helix. And Helix was going to be this sci-fi sister to the fantasy world that was Vertigo. And what ended up happening was, like, even though they had all these great books by great creators, none of them sold except for Transmetropolitan. Like, we did well enough that when the whole line ended, they decided to put Transmetropolitan over under Vertigo and publish it under that label. So we survived, but even then it was like our numbers were really low, and it was more of it became like a cult classic, kind of, more than anything else. Like, it was surprising to me, but the people that loved it really loved it. They were very passionate about it, but in order to fill in the gap for people who may not have been paying attention when it was a Helix book, they published this 3-issue collection called Back on the Street, so people could kind of get caught up with where we were on the monthly book. And that thing sold through the roof. And it was amazing how consistently and how well it sold, so much that that's when the model for collecting books while they were still being published started to emerge into the comic book market, because this was a long time ago. But but here we are today. But it seems like that trend is continuing. I could be wrong. It's just something I speculate about. But if I had my way, I think I would like to do more complete stories for the future rather than trying to chase after monthly books.
Yeah, that had to be it. I mean, there was 9 volumes of that book, right?
Yeah.
And how many issues does that compile
60,
total?
60
issues. Wow. And I've read a number of the trades, and everything you're saying makes sense to me because of the fact that it lends itself to work as a trade in general as opposed to a single issue book because of the fact that it almost feels like every trade's like an album.
Well,
And
it helped that we had that there was a set ending in mind for it. Like we knew it was going to be a 60 issue series. It was never meant to be something that would move on in perpetuity, which like you have with Batman, for example. Batman will always continue on, and so therefore there are certain things you can and can't do in a Batman story because the status quo of some of it has to be maintained. You can't have Batman have his head shot off and then just come back. Like, although ironically, this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. When I was a kid, there's like these hilarious Superman stories where Superman died in one of them, and it's like the whole world mourns him, and then it just goes on as if that didn't happen. No, he died in that story. But they didn't have a sense of continuity then as much when in the 60s and so it made me laugh when I go back and I look at that stuff because that influenced a lot of how I would approach a comic book. Like, hey, anything goes. So
it's funny because I read Batman and Elmer Fudd last week. I
want to read that. I have not seen that.
Tom King wrote it and Lee Weeks drew it. And
Lee Weeks is great, and so is Tom King.
Yeah, what they did there was absolutely hysterical. But they kind of did somewhat kind of the same thing what you're talking about with Superman, and it's funny because these characters, they still exist even if they die in their own books. But someone has to pick up the mantle of Batman. There will always be a Batman,
right? And my main point is, like, I just used Batman as an example, but
sure.
For most of comic books in general, like, that's the status quo. Like, you need to be able to kind of reset everything so the stories can continue in perpetuity. But that wasn't the case with Spider Jerusalem. Like, we had a set ending for him. So,
and it's shocking that you guys were able to keep it going for 60 issues. I mean, the commitment that took.
That was the craziest 5 years of my life. Every major change that could have happened in my adulthood happened within the 5 years while I was working on that book. And both my parents passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It's okay. Thank you. Both my parents passed away. I met the woman that would become my wife. We moved to Italy for a year, back to California, got married, moved to New York, and then were surprised when we got pregnant with my first son. So by the time I was finishing that book, I had moved internationally, cross country, lost my father, became a father, gained a wife. And by the time I was wrapping up that book, I had a baby. So
when you finished it though, was there a sense of relief? Was there a sense of, or was there a sense of like, was it a good relief? Like, thank God I don't have, thank God I did this. And I look back on my works and,
more of that. I'm very proud of that series.
You should be.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of consistency as a comic book fan. So I loathe it when I can't be the only artist on a thing that I'm doing. Like it's anathema to my aesthetics for comics. Like, I really don't like to be like when I drop the ball or if I can't keep up with the schedule. And often I would have two things going at once. And I, always try to have work on my table because, I'm a freelancer. So I really was proud that the same team, and it was so funny because despite all the headwinds we got with like being canceled at Helix and picked up at Vertigo, and we went through more editors on that book than anything else I've ever worked on. But at the same time, like the whole team that made the book stayed intact after issue 3, when we brought on Rodney Ramos with issue 5. Rodney did the 55 other issues, and we all, and Nathan Eyring and Clem Robbins, like we all stayed on the book, and that really made it kind of special because we were always rushing the deadline. We were always like, I'd get script right up at the, in the 11th hour, and a lot of times would just have to stay up, all night long for days at a time, just to make sure we hit the deadline and that Rodney got the pages. And this was pre-internet, so I wasn't able to like scan pages and upload them to Rodney to ink. I had to get them into a FedEx box by that cutoff.
Oh shit! And
just those drives through San Francisco when I was living there working on the book, and to try and get to the FedEx before the cutoff time. I literally remember banging on the big metal door and begging them to lift the, please just take the package because it's got to go. And they grumble at me, and the cutoff time is 4:30. It was like 4:32. And I'm like, please, I know you're in there. But it was like Indiana Jones stuff for me, like in memory, like, him trying to get out before the door closes, but it, that was a very different time. So it was a real like visceral labor of love. And I would draw everywhere. I drew some of those pages on an Irish ferry. I drew, when I just would always carry my work with me and had a portable drawing board. So wherever I could stop and do some artwork or get caught up, I would add a panel, do a page, and just to make sure that every issue came out, and it did. So
now, I
could do it again now at my age, but
but back then, I mean, and you didn't just do it once with Transmetropolitan. You did it with the Punisher. You did it with the Boys. Boys was 72 issues.
Yeah, 73? I didn't do every issue though. I left the book around issue 43 because I was burning out.
Yeah, sure, and that happens from time to time, of course, with the amount of work that you're doing. But actually, the question I had for you was, so you've seen a major change in terms of how work is produced and delivered now. Are you drawing everything on boards still? Or are you doing?
I still work traditionally because I like having an original piece of art when I'm done. And my dad was an airline mechanic, so it's like for me, I have this satisfaction of ending the day with dirty hands. Like if I'm washing my hands at the end of the day, I feel like I worked. But at the same time, like it's nice having an original piece of art. But I do, I also I found ways to add effects and things like that digitally to the line art once it's scanned. So when I was a kid, there was this stuff called Zipatone, and you could put your tone into the art. But you had to put like a sticker down and get an X-Acto knife out, and it was very expensive. And if you screwed it up, a lot of it got wasted. And so, but now I can do that with a computer, and I can put in all the tone I want, and that's much better. So, but I still create line art with pen and paper.
That's excellent that you've stuck to the root of it, and that actually makes sense on so many levels because you're satisfying that need to feel mentally that you've accomplished something, but 2, you got something to show for it. Like I think when you're drawing stuff digitally, there's that fear of it getting lost or something like that, but you can't lose something that's an original once you scan it in. It's it exists physically in its original form, but it also exists digitally, which is
original
nice.
art has value. People actually
yes,
sell it or give it as a gift.
I didn't want to say that, but so I'm glad you mentioned that because you never want to tip your hat too much about the fact that you're trying to make money too. But
I don't do a whole lot of original art sales, but at the same time, it's like it's more about having it that I've preserved a lot of the or I've archived a lot of my more successful stuff simply to hand down to my children. So the first 2 issues of The Boys are completely intact. Like I didn't sell any of that.
Has there been interest in it since the show became so popular?
I was interested in it all along. I mean, like St. Transmetropolitan and The Boys have done very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Just comic books.
Now, here's a question I wanted to go back to, because you'd mentioned the trend in comics, and you see things going to graphic novels and seeing people wanting to being more into that than they would be to go to their comic book shop once a month to pick up that single title. But you, as a comic book reader, what do you prefer when you pick up comics? Do you like single issues, or do you prefer graphic novels?
I prefer graphic novels because I mean, I love single issues. I love for cover art, but other than that, I much prefer to have a whole story that I can read in one sitting. I don't really want to. It bothers me if and I've been like this since I was a kid. Like that Flash 272, I didn't know that there were comic book stores at that time that were, you could go get the back issues. So for me, it's like I lived in this world where that was, whatever happened before that story, I had no idea. So I was always just kind of figuring it out as I go. And then people would give me these stacks of comics randomly, and there'd be like Avengers 37, Avengers 44, Avengers 72, and then I'm trying to put together like, okay, Avengers 37, the Beast is, red and he's angry about something. And then in 44, he's blue and, but he's longer part of the team. And but what happened between, I didn't know. And that was, so for me, like having the complete story is still like a treat for me. I like to sit down and also I know it's all in one place. Although I have a ton of single issue comics in my collection, but.
No, well, I think that's everybody does, but it takes me back when you're telling me the story, because I remember I was exposed to comics in a similar fashion that they were always handed to me, and you would finish reading a story and then you'd be like, wait, there's a to be continued. Wait, there's more of this.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you walk into your first comic shop and remember, I don't know, I'm sure you remember this, but just like the 70s and 80s, there were so many more comic shops back then. And, it's just you walk into the shop and there's all these like incredible covers and everything. Like, it's just, to me, I guess, I don't feel that same, it's not the same experience anymore walking into a comic shop because of how exposed I've been to comic conventions and going into shops and doing signings. I mean, it feels so regular to me now, but just the first time you walk into that comic shop and that smell and everything, it's just shops and doing signings. I mean, it feels so regular to me now, but just the first time you walk into that comic shop and that smell and everything, it's just shops and doing signings. I mean, all right.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had a little computer.
No, it's okay. It's all right.
I had you on two screens accidentally for a
No. It's
well,
okay. I've done that before on earlier episodes. But yeah, just what I was saying was, just the experience of going into the comic shop.
Yeah.
I remember that as a kid, and
I did too. Like when I discovered him, I think the first one I ever discovered was on Pier 39 in San Francisco, and I was, real young. Just shortly after I found that Flash issue, and they had the next one. They had 273, and they had 271, and I was able to get both, and like I finally understood like, well, what happened before and what happens next,
Sure. All right, Darick, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. But it's an important question, and I'm looking forward to your answer to this one.
Okay.
So my question is this. What was your first experience working for one of the two major publishers like, and what was it like seeing your work in print for the very first time?
I remember I got to my very first job was for DC Comics, and it was filling in for my friend who didn't meet his deadline, and so I came in and helped him draw a bunch of pages that Mark Waid wrote for the Flash TV special based on the old show from 1990, and with John Wesley Shipp on a photo cover. And so that was my first thing. And that was great because it was the Flash, and the Flash was, for me, where it all started. So it was great. But the thing that it took me a little while to get a regular job, but I ended up getting a job on Justice League Quarterly #4 with J.M. DeMatteis. And that was one of my first big, where I was the feature story. And so that was exciting. And then they asked me to take over on Justice League Europe for a fill-in run for Bart Sears. And so it was funny because that's when I was really excited. I was going to go to the comic book store the day my first issue came out and see my name on the cover, where it would say, Jones, Robertson. Then I was like, oh my God, it's going to happen. And I went down to the store all excited, and it said Sears on the cover. Like they forgot that I was.
Oh no. Oh man. Of course that's what happens. Of course that's what happens. Oh.
So my first big, monthly book, because I was going to do 6 issues, had somebody else's name on it. So that's sort of the story of my life.
Well, it sounds like that's what it's something like that always happens to me too. And I wish I had something. It's not similar in any way, but it's that same feeling of, oh, damn it. When you get let down about something. I remember.
And yet so far.
Yes, so close yet so far away. And that seems to be the story of all of our lives in comics. Yeah. But regardless,
it reminds me it's important to stay humble.
Absolutely. And again, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and sit with me for an hour and share your experiences and your stories. It's made me really appreciate your work even more. And you've worked on so many damn comics, Darick, that I can't even tell which issue it all happened in, but I'm so familiar with your work. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I know that I know that you're gonna everything is still forward for you, and I look forward to it in the sense that as an aspiring creator who is seeing who's trying to find his own path, it's really remarkable to see how far you've come and how far you still have yet to go.
Well, thanks. I'm happy. Like I said, I feel blessed to be healthy and working. And Hellblazer Rise and Fall comes out next month, and I'm inking it, as well as I'm penciling and inking it. It's a limited story of 3 issues, 44 pages each. So it's going to be a nice little complete story when it's all done. Just digging into issue 3 today. And
that's fantastic.
And then Tom Taylor's the best. We're having a great time working together. We like each other, so that helps a lot.
I don't think Tom Taylor. I don't know. I'm not very well versed in his work, but I've seen pictures of the guy, and he just looks like somebody. Like, how can you possibly hate this guy? He just looks like the kindest guy in the world.
Pretty much. That's a good description of Tom. On top of that, he wrote this series we worked on. Kind of was a predecessor to this Rise and Fall book, which I did 7 pages of. Deceased, Good Day to Die. He's created a whole universe where Darkseid has turned all the superheroes into like bloodthirsty zombies, and it's great stuff. And I wish I only drew a Constantine portion of one of his specials, but if you're not familiar with it, he's just a terrific writer. Almost everything I see from him is just, he always works with great artists. Made an exception for me,
No. They're the exception. You're
his stuff is great, so I highly recommend, especially the Deceased stuff. That's good reading. So,
excellent.
Suicide Squad's pretty awesome too. He's doing some great stuff with that.
Excellent. Darick, do us a favor. Give us one last shout out. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us where we can support you. What the best way is that if anybody who's watching the show who wants to throw big stacks of money at you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Buy Oliver, the trade paperback. It's available now. It just came out. First 4 issues collected from Image Comics. You can find me on Twitter at Darick R with my weird spelling. But be warned, I tend to get political. And Hellblazer Rise and Fall comes out next month from DC Black Label, and I hope you pick it up. It's great. And that's the best way to support me right now.
Excellent. Darick, if you have a moment.
Season 2, September 4th.
Yes, September 4th. I'm going to be sharing this interview again right on that day too. After people watch it, they'll come here and they get to hear what you had to say on Live with ONRIE today. Darick, if you have a moment, do you mind hanging out backstage? I'm going to close out the show. I just wanted to say a couple things to you before we part ways. Yeah, excellent. All right. Just give me a second here.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. What a great episode. stellar guest. Awesome time. I had a great time with Darick today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It means so much to me. If you haven't yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's right over here somewhere. And I will be back with Live with ONRIE next week. Later on this week, I will be uploading a brand new episode of ONWARD with ONRIE, where I continue my journey and share my experiences with you. So I will see you guys later in the week. And next week, we got some awesome guests coming on. So I will see you then. And until that time comes, onward to victory.